Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Rob Hanna. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Rod Freeman. Rod is an international products lawyer with more than 20 years' experience supporting the world's leading and most innovative companies. He is currently a partner at Cooley LLP in London, where he has been building a products law team that focuses on creative and practical commercial solutions to worldwide problems. Rod previously worked as the global head of product liability and product safety at Hogan Lovells and has been appointed by the European Commission to its expert group on liability and new technologies. He has also been regularly ranked as a leading figure in the industry, appearing in the Lawyer magazine's list of Hot 100 Lawyers in the UK for 2018 and appearing in the Legal 500 Hall of Fame. So, a very, very warm welcome, Rod.
Hi, Rob. Thanks very much.
Absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And before we dive into all your amazing achievements and legal experiences to date, we do have a customary question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, how real would you rate Suits in terms of its reality of the show?
Yeah, I mean, it's an obvious 10, isn't it, really? I'd have to say, we look at Suits and we think, I know that person and I recognize that person, and really what we're saying is there's a bit of that in me and a bit of that person in me. And I think the thing is, though, if you have to accept there's a bit of Harvey Specter and Michael Ross in all of us, you've also got to assume there's a bit of Lewis Litt in all of us as well. So that's how I say Suits.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that response. And it's good to have a partner say that. So good for you. Okay, you've got a really inspiring story. So I want to start at the beginning, Rod. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your family background and upbringing, firstly?
Sure. As my accent sometimes gives away, I wasn't born in the UK. I was born and raised in Sydney, Australia. Sydney's my hometown, and in many ways I still consider it home at heart. Although I've been in the UK for more than 20 years now. But I did start my career in Australia, and it was really in Australia that I became a products lawyer. But I started my career in the western suburbs of Sydney. I was the first person in my family to go to university, and ended up managing to find myself doing a law degree at university. And back in those days, without sort of people around me to guide me in the profession or give me clues as to how to navigate the profession, I struggled to land anything at the big firms, but ended up at a really, really great firm in the outer western suburbs of Sydney. At the time was a 7-partner high street practice, really. We did conveyancing for mums and dads and families, and a little bit of commercial work, and generally it was a nice little commercial / domestic practice in the western suburbs of Sydney, and that's where I started my career. And at least in those days, I certainly assumed that's where I would be for the whole of my career. It seems a long time ago now.
Yeah, great stuff. And you mentioned you were the first member of your family to go to university. So what was it that inspired you to go to university and then specifically to study the law?
Yeah, well, it was one of those things, I was doing okay at school, and was getting reasonable marks, and I guess on that basis it was always assumed I would go to university. But it took me a long while to work out really what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a marine biologist, and that was my goal. And then as I started to hit my last 2 years of high school, I started to think a bit more about a career and realised that actually, while it might be fun to be a marine biologist, sort of career options might have been a little bit limited. And at that time, I entered a mooting competition that my school had entered into. And I did pretty well in the mooting competition, and that made me think really for the first time, actually, maybe a career in the law. So within my last 2 years of school, I ditched a lot of my science subjects, picked up a lot of the artsy type subjects, and ended up becoming a lawyer.
Great stuff. And look, you've achieved so much throughout your career. One of the things I wanted to ask is the transition. So why did you make the transition from Australia to the UK? And what was that like? What were some of the differences and what made it quite challenging for you?
Yeah, sure. Well, it was a bit of a journey, actually. As I said, I was working in this high street firm in the suburbs of Sydney, and I was there for many years, and assumed that's where I would stay. But after a few years there, I was doing conveyancing, just property transactions for the families and people in the local community. One day the partners came to me and said to me, Rod, you've been doing the property work for a couple of years. Why don't you try your hand at some litigation? We've got a little commercial client that has that might have a problem. that client at the time was Dow Corning, and that was really day one of silicone breast implant litigation. So out of that 7-partner firm in the suburbs of Sydney, I found myself pretty quickly in the middle of what was to become one of the world's biggest product liability cases.
Wow.
And I worked on that at that firm for a number of years before, in many respects, the job outgrew the firm, and I ended up moving to a larger national firm. But throughout that period, I had a dream to spend part of my life in Europe, and had tried a number of times to make a transition. But again, being at a suburban firm in Sydney, the recruitment agents just weren't interested. Frankly, the big law firms weren't interested in somebody coming from the firm I was at. It wasn't a recognised firm. And so nothing came off. And it was really only as the breast implant litigation was starting to wind up after many years, and I found myself at a crossroads in my career, that I thought, okay, one last chance, one last try to get to London. By that stage, I was a pretty experienced product liability lawyer. So I picked up the phone and I rang the partners that did product liability in London. And really just out of some cold calls to partners who did what I did, I snagged a job. It was really sort of 3 phone calls later, I was saying to my wife, pack a bag, we're moving to London.
I love that. And again, you're showing some of your partner traits already through just, that BD side in you and that sort of picking up the phone side. But I want to still stay back to the early days, because you mentioned you're at this high street firm in Australia, and lots of people will probably be wanting to know, what is the difference between a high street firm and, say, some of these larger, bigger firms? What are some of the key differentials if you were to kind of sum them up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I really value that those first years I spent at a smaller firm, and feel very privileged to have had that grounding, because I think one of the key differences is you are much more in touch with human beings in the work that you do day by day. I think in a big firm doing corporate work, it's sort of very easy to depersonalize it. Everything. There's a lot of money at stake, but doesn't necessarily feel as personal. But certainly when I started at the high street firm, for example, I did work writing wills, and I had a box of tissues on my desk every time, the whole time, because every time somebody sits down and wants to talk through a will, they cry. And so I had learned the importance of the human touch. And I think that's something I take with me into the work I do now. My clients now are much more typically very large international corporations, but the people I'm engaged with are human beings, and they're people, and they feel stuff, and they're trying to do a good job, and they rely upon me to help them do a good job. So I think that personal touch, I think, can sometimes be lost in a big firm, but I had a grounding in those first few years that I think has stuck with me.
Do you know what? That's a really good point, because even nowadays with the next generation of lawyers, they're always talking about, well, what do I technically need to be good? And I always say you're a human first, then a lawyer. And I think actually probably having that experience you had right from the start, that's always stayed with you. And I can just hear and see that sort of human side of you coming through and through, which is great. And obviously probably one of the reasons you've got to where you are in your career. So what advice would you give to anyone potentially from Australia or abroad thinking of making a similar move to what you did?
Yeah. I think the advice I would give from my experience is to not assume that the way things have been done in the past is the way things always have to be done. I mean, and as I was explaining, my route to getting the experience in the UK was different to most, because I wasn't from one of the big firms, and I didn't sort of take that very normal route where in the larger firms in Australia, the opportunities open up for an international stint. I had to find my own way. So that would be something I would sort of say to anyone whose sort of background is not necessarily straight out of the cookie cutter, that sometimes you need to find your own way. And like I said, my approach was to just decide I'm just going to pick up the phone, be a little bit bold, and ring some partners. I was a relatively junior lawyer at the time, and I can tell you the partners didn't mind being rung. They appreciated that all of them. Not all of them offered me a job, but they all appreciated the call. And so I think that's sort of part of the key, really, that sometimes for some people, there is a well-trodden route to a life experience or a career experience. For others, you have to find your own way, but don't assume you can't find your own way just because people tell you that's not the way it's done.
Yeah, I love that mindset. I love that. Okay, and then you previously worked at Hogan Lovells for, I believe, around 17 years. Yeah. So what was that like? Tell us about some of those experiences and what you learned from your time there.
Yeah, that was a great experience for me, because bearing in mind that was the firm I landed at. That was the firm that gave me the opportunity to move to London, and there was Lovells back in those days. And it really was a very rich time for me to spend those early years at Lovells. And that firm has evolved a lot. It's now Hogan Lovells, and it's not the same firm as it was when it was Lovells. But for me, for most of the time I was there, it was Lovells, and it had a good culture. And it was very supportive of what I wanted to do. And certainly in those early days, again, when I came to London with fresh ideas and wanted to do things in ways that hadn't been done before, then I found that I was given some opportunities and was able to spread my wings a bit and create a few things, and it worked out very well. And at the time I moved to London, I never assumed it would be permanent. It was sort of life experience for a couple of years, then we'll see what happens. But to a large part because of the way in which the career worked out, I've stuck and have been here for more than 20 years now.
Yeah, great stuff. And then, so after that period, I think in 2017, you became a partner of Cooley LLP. And given that longevity of your time at Hogan Lovells, why did you decide to make the move? And are you happy that you made that leap?
It has been fantastic. It has been one of the richest experiences of my career and of my life, really. The move to Cooley. There were a couple of things that sort of drove me to make a change, and I think a change in a career is good sometimes. I wouldn't say that to my team around me at Cooley, but the truth is that sometimes a change is good. And certainly for me, I was sort of looking at what the future held, and saw the way in which my work was very much focused on tech and in innovative companies. And I thought, well, I would like to be in a firm that is at the forefront of tech. And I think that's I want to work at the forefront of tech. So I wanted to be in a firm that really was going to be at the top of that game for the future. And that coincided with me also wanting to find a big law firm that had a different culture. Law firms are complicated beasts, and culture is a big thing. And I've learned that over the last few years, that organisations have a culture, and that's very, very real. And if you have a good culture and lose it, it's lost for good. And so I went on a bit of a search for a firm that had a culture that I wanted and I wanted to be in. And happily, somebody who knew what I wanted said, "Have you spoken to Cooley?" I hadn't at that time. I'd spoken to some other firms, but Cooley didn't have a products practice, so they weren't really on my radar. But this person kept coming back and saying, "You really need to talk to Cooley." And once I did start to speak to Cooley, I realised actually, this is a firm that has a very, very real culture that's different to what I'd experienced before.
Great stuff. Okay, so let's fast forward to the present day then. So tell us a bit about your current role and what a day in the life looks like.
Each day is very different, Rob, in some ways, but fundamentally what I have a big team around me of really, really smart, fun lawyers. And what we do each day really is help companies deal with challenges relating to their products. Our clients typically are product manufacturers and product designers, product developers, ranging from sort of small startups doing really, really crazy stuff to the biggest tech companies on the planet. And it's a complicated world for them out there. They're trying to do new things. They're trying to innovate. They're trying to get products on the market that have never been conceived before. And the world's a complicated place. So we help them navigate those problems. Challenges arise all the time. We help them solve those problems, deal with the regulators around the world, and basically just get alongside them and their technology and help them be successful. But it's exciting for us because we get to really get very close to these companies and their innovations and their innovative mentality and approach to the world, and get to become part of that and facilitate that. Often I feel like we spend half of our time learning about products and how they're made and how they work and what happens when they go wrong. And I often think to myself, this beats being a lawyer. This is the law comes in occasionally, but fundamentally we're learning about products and understanding the world and finding solutions for the companies. So it's good fun.
Yeah, no, it sounds fascinating. And as we mentioned, since joining Cooley, you've been building a different kind of products law team. So can you tell us a bit more about what that means?
Yeah, sure. Part of the answer to that is, whilst in many ways people would describe me as a product liability lawyer, product liability has changed a lot. And what we do is think about product liability in a much more holistic way, because for product manufacturers, the risks that they are managing with their products is these days, not so much about the risk of getting sued because somebody's got hurt. That risk is certainly there, and a risk that we help them avoid and manage. But the risks to their business are much, much broader. So a lot of it is around safety regulation and ensuring that products are safe and comply with the rules. And so that is very much part of product liability for us, as much as the risk of litigation. But more and more, even that's evolving. And now it's about sustainability and the circular economy and repairability and product obsolescence, privacy, cybersecurity. So all of these issues are part of what we think of as modern product liability. And it's that approach to risk and our clients' problems that I think is the future for the work we do.
Great stuff. And obviously with the pandemic, we've had to really kind of move to this virtual hybrid ways of working. But how have you found managing cases during the whole COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, it's certainly been challenging and not been fun the whole time. I have to say, I think we're all ready to stop doing it this way all the time now. But we've adapted. We've seen our clients adapt very, very quickly and very successfully, and we've done the same. So we've moved to a different way of working. We speak to each other now by Zoom rather than face to face. But yeah, I have to say we no longer do telephone conference calls, which used to be a normal part of life. But I've sworn I will never do a telephone conference call again. I think when this world in which we are always face to face in one form or another, I think is a much richer work experience. So in some ways, we've certainly missed being face to face and in the same room and enjoying the interaction that happens when we're together or with our clients in a room. But on the other hand, we've moved into this other rich experience of every contact really being a face-to-face contact rather than telephone contacts, which I think is something we can take forward for the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's about taking the positives from the experience we've had where possible. Okay, and I mentioned in my introduction, you hold multiple leadership positions in the international product law community and frequently work with policymakers about the future around product liability and product regulation. You've been appointed by the European Commission to its expert group on liability and new technologies. You've also served 2 terms on the board of directors with the International Consumer Products Health and Safety Organization. So just tell us a bit more about all these experiences and how you fit it all in.
Yeah. Well, I fit it all in firstly by having a really great team around me.
Yeah.
So, and I couldn't do it without them. I have to say, because they do sort of keep the wheels turning while I'm sort of off talking to governments and policymakers about the future. But to us, it's all part of why we think we're valuable to our clients, because we're not only able to tell them what the rules are now, but we also have an eye on what's going to happen in the future. But for me, it's just absolutely critical for the work that we do. In a world where we are working with clients who are innovating products for the future, they need to know what the future holds. So it's something that I just have to make time for, to spend time in these international forums, and also to play a role in influencing the future and helping make the right decisions about the future. But it's certainly one of the privileges of having done this for a long time, to be able to sort of play that kind of role in the important decisions of the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Really well said. And I mentioned again in the intro, you've been regularly ranked as a leading figure in the industry, appearing in the Lawyer magazine's top 100 in the UK for 2018, appearing in the Legal 500 Hall of Fame as a partner at a major firm, hold multiple leadership positions, as we know. What have you done to achieve this, or what things would you pay back to people thinking, wow, I'd love that success? What would you say to that?
I think, again, I would say that everyone has to find their own path. But my path was, I think, for a start, to have a vision for the future. Because when I landed in London 20 or so years ago, one of the things I did was I noticed that there was some change coming down the pipeline under European law around in the world of product safety. There was some new legislation that I thought was going to change things fairly significantly. So I started taking an interest in that, learning about it, thinking about it, and talking to my clients about it. And my predictions are right, that did become revolutionary for product safety in Europe. And I was focused on it really when no one else was. And I think, particularly in the legal profession, it's a very conservative profession, and there's a lot of impetus towards doing things the way they've always been done and focusing on the things that have proven to be successful. Whereas my approach sometimes is, if no one's focusing on something, that's a reason to focus on it rather than a reason not to. So I think for me, having that vision for what was around the corner, and I think that has continued in what I've done. I've been trying to look around the corner and predict where these changes are going to come from and what impact they're going to have. So that's definitely been part of it, as well as I think being bold enough to try things, as I said, that haven't been done before, and building an international products team. At the time I did it, really had not been done before by any other major firm. It wasn't seen as a big profit driver. I found a way to make it a very successful practice, and because we're a little bit unique, then it's become very successful. I've also been very, very mindful of relationships, and yes. My philosophy has always been, you spend your time making friends, not enemies, uncompromisingly. Yeah. And that applies, in hard-fought litigation when sometimes there's a very aggressive, sometimes perhaps a very annoying lawyer on the other side. But I've always avoided sort of making an enemy out of those people. I've always tried to develop a relationship, even if we're opponents, even if we disagree with each other, even if we never see eye to eye. I always try to leave my relationships with other professionals on a positive basis. I've really seen the benefit of that. Certainly a lot of the opportunities I have now, a lot of the successes, the clients that come in the door are linked to relationships that I've built with people all around the world over a very long period of time. So that's definitely something that I try to instill in the team around me, that these relationships are important. Everyone is to be respected. Our fellow professionals are fellow professionals, and we don't make enemies out of people. We, even if they're competitors, even if we don't like what they're doing, we treat everyone with respect and we build relationships. And it's really important because, and it just, over time, it just brings so many benefits, as well as being a nicer way to work as well.
Yeah, I love that. That just oozes to me just the professionalism that you bring to your job. And you don't necessarily need to like people, but having that respect and just managing relationships in the right way is always a good way to go about business. Okay, I do want to talk about legal tech because you are one of the best tech law firms in the world, undoubtedly. So, we've had lots of legal tech entrepreneurs come onto the show. We've had Legal Connection that are trying to create the WhatsApp of law. We've had Avoca that are trying to really dominate the automation space. How much legal tech do you use in your current practice, and what do you think is the future for legal tech versus human legal work?
I think there's absolutely no question that legal tech is going to revolutionise the profession, and with every revolution of that nature, that's going to come with some cost, and it's going to require people to adapt and change. But certainly in the work I do, for example, I absolutely see that a lot of what I do now, I'm not going to be doing in 5 or 10 years' time. We spend a lot of time helping companies understand what the rules and regulations are around the world, and it's very fast moving, and it can be very difficult to keep on top of, and frankly, it can cost a lot of money to have lawyers like us solve those problems. There's no one else to do it, and they have to ask us to do it. But it's costly, and I don't see that as being long term. I see, we are plugging a gap until technology picks up and technology allows us to support our clients to establish that technology, and then we move to a different way of supporting them. So I see ourselves as currently in a transition with a lot of what we do, and we're starting to leverage that technology to support our clients and to make what we do more efficient and more cost effective, because that has to be the future, but we're not there yet. So I think there's a lot of change happening now, much more change on the horizon.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I mean, 2021 has just burst on the scenes with all these new innovations, and then NFTs have been top conversations, the wealth of the creator economy emerging, all these new tech advancements. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You have to sort of listen and see what's out there, but it's getting the right balance and what works for each individual firm. Okay, so what key piece of advice would you give to anyone who's interested in your particular area of law?
I mean, one of the key pieces of advice is, I think, to be smart and be flexible. The work I do is changing all the time. Opportunities are opening up all the time. And so a lot of it, I think, is about being aware of the opportunities that are around and being flexible enough to take those opportunities when they come. Yeah. And so that, I think would be the key piece of advice. I mean, I would say just sort of looking at my own career, when I spent those sort of first few years working in Sydney, I would not have even sort of dreamed of being a product liability lawyer. I probably didn't know what a product liability lawyer was. It just came, an opportunity came, landed on my desk one day, and that was the opportunity I ended up grabbing and making the most of that particular opportunity. So sometimes in life and in careers, and particularly in law, you can't always assume how it's going to work out, and you can't always predict that. You set your goals and you try to focus yourself, but also sort of keep looking sideways and see what trains are coming past, because that train that goes past may not be the train that you were expecting, but that might be the one that gets you to where your destiny is. So I'd definitely give that advice to young lawyers thinking about their careers, to be focused on what they want, but also be looking sideways at the opportunities.
Yeah, great advice. And obviously yourself, you've reached the sort of the top. Everyone typically has that aspiration of perhaps wishing to be a partner in a law firm one day. How do you stay motivated? What future goals, aspirations do you have for yourself? Yeah,
I'm still learning. I learn every day, and I do tell myself, that the day I come into the office and feel like I haven't learned anything is probably that's probably a sign it's time to stop. But that day's never going to come, because it's such a dynamic area, and that's what excites me. And I think even in my own area, the practice of product liability is very, very different now to what it was 10 years ago. And for the reasons I've said, it's going to be very different 10 years from now. So being part of that change is very exciting and very stimulating, as well as working for the clients that we do. These companies just have such amazing ideas and have such boldness and are just doing things that I could not have conceived a number of years ago. So having the privilege of being involved at that level with those companies will continue to get me out of bed every day and skipping into the office most days.
Okay, and a couple of final questions from me. What one key skill do you think you have at the moment that if you were to remove all of your skills from your toolbox, what's the one thing you would not want to lose, and why?
I think judgment, the judgment that comes from experience. Definitely, where I am now, that's my big value add. I'm surrounded by really, really great, smart lawyers, most of whom I'm just in awe of in terms of the brain power that's around me. What I do have over them is experience on the whole. And I think to be a really effective lawyer, you need to be smart, but very often especially with a lot of the things that we're grappling with our clients, there's no substitute for experience. There's not much I haven't seen. I've dealt with the biggest problems companies have had. So it's very rare a client comes to me with a problem and I think, wow, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. That doesn't happen, because I've seen some pretty bad stuff happen to companies. So I think that experience is probably what I leverage most of the time these days. That will always be valuable, I think.
Yeah. And obviously, we have been through a pandemic. We're hopefully coming out of that. Fingers crossed, touch wood. We need to look after our mental health. We need to look after ourselves physically. What do you do for downtime and to try to get time away from the office?
I'm a very big believer in downtime. I think it's absolutely critical, and certainly within our team, we do spend a lot of time talking about this and thinking about it and finding ways to ensure that everybody is finding their way to have downtime. For me, I've have been a cyclist for a long, long time. I used to race.
Oh, wow.
I had a bit of racing in my blood, and I don't race anymore, but I still enjoy getting out on the road on a weekend, spending 4 or 5 hours out on the bike, turning out the miles and breathing in the air and switching off the brain. So that's my way to switch off. Everyone has their own thing, but for me, that's been absolutely amazing.
So that need for speed.
Yeah, that's right. I think there is a little bit of that in it, I guess.
Good stuff. Okay, Rod. Well, I've been absolutely fascinated and loved having you on the show. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to have thoroughly enjoyed what you've had to say today. So if people want to follow or get in touch with you about anything we've discussed today, what's the best way for them to do that? Feel free to shout out any web links or any relevant social medias or LinkedIn, and we'll make sure we share them with this episode for you too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm certainly happy to be contacted at Cooley. My details are on the website. So usually sort of email is the best way to contact me. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, and people do reach out to me on LinkedIn. Sometimes my responses are a little bit slower through LinkedIn, which is why emails are sometimes better, but you can certainly keep up with me on LinkedIn as well.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Rod. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Wishing you lots of continued success with your legal career. But from all of us on the Legally Speaking podcast, over and out. This week's review comes from Annie Lewis, 123. Annie says, 10 out of 10, would recommend, really helpful for law students. Thank you so much for your lovely, kind words, Annie. Really means a lot to all of us here on the Legally Speaking podcast team. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Legally Speaking podcast. If you enjoyed the show and want to help support us, remember to leave us a rating and review on Apple iTunes. You can also support the show and gain exclusive benefits, bonus content, and much more by signing up to our Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/Legally Speaking podcast. Thanks for listening.